I found the forgotten blind king. Instead of biting me, he kissed my hand. The wind moaned through the ruins, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and forgotten memories. Mist clung to the broken walls of the old palace like a ghostly veil, hiding the grandeur that had once been. Ivy climbed the cracked pillars, winding through sculptures whose faces had long since eroded into anonymity. Every step Alara took echoed, a lonely sound swallowed quickly by the vast emptiness around her. She had heard the stories in hushed whispers from village elders and wandering merchants. A king had vanished decades ago, they said, leaving behind a kingdom that no longer knew sunlight. Some called him mad, others monstrous. But curiosity had pulled her here, like a moth to a flame that promised truth behind the tales. The great doors of the palace groaned as she pushed them open, revealing a hall choked with shadows. Moonlight spilled through cracks in the roof, painting fractured patterns across the cold marble floor. She took a careful step inside. Dust rose around her feet, shimmering in the faint light. Each breath she took felt heavy, as if the air itself remembered the lives that had once filled this place. At the end of the hall, her eyes caught a movement, or perhaps it was stillness that seemed alive. There upon the fractured throne sat a man. His figure was tall, though thin, draped in robes that had once been magnificent but now hung in tatters. His face, pale and sharp, was turned toward her, yet his eyes were covered by a thin blindfold. Alara froze. The legends spoke of him as a monster, someone who had devoured the light from the palace. But there was no malice in him now. No fangs, no snarling, only a quiet dignity, as if he had been waiting for her all this time. His hand, pale and slender, rested gently upon the arm of the throne. When he moved, it was deliberate, graceful, almost ceremonial. "You've come," he said, his voice soft, a sound that seemed to stir the air itself. Alara's throat tightened. She had expected fear, suspicion, maybe even anger, but she found none of that. She only felt drawn. Her own hand rose slowly, almost without thought, and the king lifted his hand to meet hers. He did not bite, as stories had suggested. He did not recoil, nor did he strike. Instead, he leaned forward, pressing a chaste kiss to the back of her hand. It was a small, simple gesture, yet it held centuries of longing, power, and sorrow all at once. Alara's heart thudded. She felt as though she had touched not just a man, but the very soul of the palace itself, ruined, silent, yet full of secrets. "Who are you?" she whispered, though she knew the answer might be impossible to speak. "I am forgotten," he said. "I am the king who can no longer see, the one who remains even when the world moves on." His words were not bitter. They were neither proud nor mournful. They were simply true. And in that truth, a strange warmth settled in Alara's chest, mingling uneasily with fear. She moved closer, her steps cautious. Why am I here? To find me," he said simply, "and perhaps to remember what has been lost." There was a pause, a silence so deep it seemed to hold the echoes of centuries. Alara's eyes roamed the throne room, noting the shattered tapestries, the toppled statues, the cracks in the floor that had widened over decades. Yet in this ruined place there was a strange kind of life. Shadows danced in the corners, but they were not threatening. They were watching, as if the palace itself were alive and curious. The king stood slowly, with the assistance of a carved cane that looked more like a relic than a tool. His movements were careful, measured, but there was a subtle strength in him that the ruins could not take away. When he reached her, he lifted his hand again, not in command but in invitation. "Walk with me," he said. Alara hesitated, then nodded. She followed him through the hallways, stepping lightly over fallen stones. He did not speak of himself at first. Instead, he guided her through the palace as if it were a map written in memory rather than stone. Each room they passed seemed to hold a story, a memory that he whispered aloud in fragments. A ballroom filled with laughter that no longer existed, a library where books had been devoured by time, a garden where roses bloomed even in shadow. "Do you remember the light?" he asked suddenly, and his tone was gentle, almost childlike. Alara shook her head. I do not. He smiled faintly, though the blindfold hid his eyes. Nor did I for many years. Perhaps that is why you came, to see what I cannot. There was something hypnotic about his voice, a rhythm that pulled at her mind. She felt as if she were being drawn into a world where time bent, where past and present mingled. She wanted to ask him more, to understand him fully, yet words felt inadequate. She sensed that the walls around him were not just stone, they were memory, sorrow, and regret. They reached the tallest tower of the palace, where the windows had long since lost their glass. The wind whipped through, tangling their hair and carrying the scent of the surrounding forest. He paused at the edge, letting the mist curl around him like a cloak. "Do you fear me?" he asked, his voice almost tender. Alara thought carefully. "I do not know. I fear what I do not understand, perhaps, but I do not fear you." His hand brushed hers, and she felt a shiver, not from cold but from something deeper. "That is wise," he murmured. "And yet, wisdom alone will not save you here." The shadows in the tower seemed to deepen, taking shapes that were almost human, almost alive. Alara tightened her grip on the hem of her cloak, but the king's presence beside her steadied her. For the first time, she realized that he was not only a figure of legend, not merely a blind ruler of a forgotten realm. He was a man shaped by tragedy, by loss, by the weight of a kingdom that had been abandoned by all but him. "Why did you kiss my hand?" she asked softly, unable to keep the question from escaping. He hesitated, then answered slowly. "Because it is the first honest touch I have had in decades, because it is a reminder that not all who come to me do so with fear or greed. And because, perhaps, even in darkness, there is something worth protecting." Alara felt her chest tighten. There was longing in his words, a longing not for herself alone, but for a world that had forgotten him. She realized then that she too had been searching, not for a palace or a king, but for the truth buried beneath time, sorrow, and shadow. A sudden sound broke the fragile calm, a distant creak, like a door opening in the wind. Alara turned sharply, but the hallways behind them were empty. The king's hand found hers again, firm and grounding. "They watch," he said simply. "Not all shadows are silent." Her pulse quickened. Who or what could still linger in a place abandoned for decades? And yet, even as fear prickled at her, she could not pull away from him. She was drawn to his silence, to the mystery that clung to him like a second skin. He lifted his face, the blindfold still in place, and whispered, "Do you wish to know the truth of me?" Alara nodded, though a shiver ran down her spine. She knew that some truths could burn, that some knowledge demanded a price, yet she could not turn back now. "Then you must follow me further," he said, "beyond what you have seen, beyond what the world remembers. Only there will you find the shadows that are mine and perhaps the light you seek." The wind surged around them, carrying a whisper that was almost a voice, a promise, a warning. Alara tightened her grip on his hand, her heart pounding with fear, curiosity, and a strange, blooming hope. And in that moment she knew that nothing, neither the ruins nor the shadows, nor the forgotten king himself, would ever be the same again. A sudden movement in the mist, a shape fleeting, barely seen, made her step back. Her breath caught. The shadows in the distance seemed to shift and stir, alive in ways she did not understand. The king's voice was calm but firm. "They have waited for someone to disturb their silence, and now we have." Alara swallowed hard, her heart racing. She realized with a mixture of dread and anticipation that her journey had only just begun. The palace, the forgotten king, the shadows, they were all alive, watching, waiting. And she had stepped willingly into their world. The mist clung to the palace walls like a living thing, curling around broken pillars and shattered windows. Alara could feel it pressing against her skin, cold and damp, as if the air itself carried the weight of years long forgotten. The blind king guided her deeper into the palace, past halls that seemed endless, twisting like a labyrinth that had been shaped by memory rather than stone. "Where are we going?" Alara asked, her voice quiet in the heavy silence. "To where the palace remembers itself," he said. His tone was calm, almost distant, yet there was an undercurrent of urgency beneath it. "There are rooms that hold truth and rooms that hold lies. You must see both." Alara shivered. She had felt the shadows following her steps, faint shapes moving just beyond her sight. And yet she did not fear them, not entirely. There was something in the king's presence that grounded her, a strength in his silence that demanded trust. They reached a doorway carved from black stone, etched with symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. The king rested his hand on the cold surface. "This is the Hall of Echoes," he said. "It will show you what has been hidden for centuries, but be warned, not all that is revealed can be unseen." Alara stepped forward cautiously. The air grew heavier as she crossed the threshold. Shadows swirled along the walls, coalescing into shapes that hinted at memories rather than realities. She could see faint outlines of people, dressed in robes, kneeling, bowing, celebrating, yet no sound accompanied them. It was like looking at a painting that moved, alive yet silent. The king lifted his hand to hers again. "Feel with me," he instructed. "Do not rely only on sight. Let your senses guide you." She hesitated, then placed her hand over his. A warmth spread through her fingers, reaching deep into her chest. Slowly, as if guided by invisible threads, she began to perceive more than the shapes on the walls. She could feel the joy of a feast that had been eaten long ago, the sorrow of a betrayal that had ended in silence, the despair of a king who had seen his people suffer and could do nothing. Alara's breath caught. The visions were not cruel or threatening, they were real. They were truth stripped bare, and in each memory she could see the king himself, young and strong, standing at the heart of the palace, bound by a fate he had not chosen. "You see," he said softly, "the curse is not just mine, it is the kingdom's. Every shadow you see is a fragment of what was taken from us from me." Alara turned to him. "Curse? What kind of curse?" He hesitated, as if weighing which words to offer. "Long ago, when the sorceress came, she offered the kingdom a choice. Safety for all at the cost of my sight. I accepted, believing it was the only way to protect them. But the magic was cruel. It took more than my sight. It took years, memories, and part of my soul. I am bound by it still. And anyone who becomes close to me shares its weight." A chill ran down Alara's spine. The legends had spoken of a monster, a forgotten king who devoured those who approached him. And yet here he stood, revealing the truth, offering her trust. "Why show me this?" she asked. "Because you are different," he said. "You are not afraid. You do not see me as a monster, and perhaps you can help me break it." Alara's heart raced. "Break it? How?" The king's hand tightened slightly around hers. "There is a way," he said, "but it is not simple. It requires trust, courage, and a willingness to face what you fear most. Are you ready for that?" She swallowed hard. The truth in his words pressed on her like a weight, but curiosity and something deeper, a strange longing, kept her rooted. "I am ready," she whispered. He nodded, a faint smile brushing his lips. "Then we begin." He led her through a narrow staircase carved into the stone, winding downward until the air grew warmer, richer, as if the palace itself was breathing. At the bottom, they entered a chamber filled with mirrors of varying sizes, each reflecting not only their forms but fragments of time, distorted and flickering. "These are the mirrors of memory," the king explained. "They show what is lost, what is hidden, and what can be feared. You must look carefully. Only then can the curse be understood and undone." Alara stepped closer, her reflection shifting in strange ways. For a moment she saw herself as she had been in childhood, standing in a field of sunlight and flowers. Then the mirror shifted, and she saw herself older, braver, yet filled with fear. And in the corner of one mirror, a shadow moved, always behind her, always waiting. "Do not be afraid," the king said. "The mirrors will test you. They will show you both truth and temptation. You must see without flinching." Alara nodded, though her heart pounded. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the nearest mirror. Instantly a vision struck her, a version of the king, young and furious, standing over the bodies of those who had betrayed him. She recoiled, but he placed his hand on hers, grounding her. "Remember," he said, "that was not all of me. I am more than the anger, more than the shadows. And so are you." Breathing deeply, she forced herself to look again. The mirrors showed her glimpses of the sorceress who had cursed him, a woman shrouded in darkness, her eyes like molten fire. She saw the moment of the king's blindness, the sacrifice he had made, the sorrow he had carried alone. And she realized with a strange ache how heavy the burden had been, not just for him, but for anyone who loved him. "Do you understand now?" he asked. Alara nodded, her fingers trembling. I do, but how can this curse be broken?" The king's hand left hers for a moment, tracing a symbol etched into the floor. It glowed faintly, a soft silver light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "It requires what I cannot give alone. It requires faith, faith in another, and it requires a willingness to confront the darkness inside both of us." Alara felt a shiver run through her. She did not fully understand what he meant, but she felt the weight of his words pressing into her soul. To help him, she would have to face fears she had never spoken aloud. And perhaps, in doing so, she would discover truths about herself as well. They spent hours in the chamber, moving from mirror to mirror, each reflection a test of courage, of memory, of understanding. She saw visions of the king's triumphs and failures, the loyalty of those who had followed him, the betrayals that had left him alone. And in each vision, she felt a growing connection, a thread weaving her life with his. Finally, they paused before the largest mirror, its surface black as night. The king's voice was soft, almost reverent. "This is the mirror of the heart. It shows what you desire and what you fear most. Look carefully, Alara. What you see here may change everything." Alara swallowed hard and stepped forward. The mirror rippled under her gaze, and she saw herself, not alone but beside the king. His hand reached for hers, and she saw his face, blindfolded yet radiant with trust. But behind that, shadows shifted. Faces appeared, faces of those who had tried to claim him, to harm him, to undo everything. And among them the faintest shape moved, watching, waiting, patient. Her chest tightened. She realized then that the palace itself was not merely haunted by memory. It was alive with the remnants of those who had sought to destroy him. And now, by stepping into his world, she had become part of it. The king placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Do you still wish to help me?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. "No matter what comes." He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Then we must be ready. The curse will not yield easily, and those who watch will test us. Trust in me and trust in yourself." They left the chamber together, moving back through the winding halls, their hands brushing, a silent promise binding them. The mist outside had thickened, swirling like living smoke. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, fleeting and sinister. She sensed eyes following them, waiting for a moment to strike. As they reached the top of the palace stairs, a sudden sound broke the quiet, a scraping, faint and deliberate, echoing through the empty halls. Alara froze. "They are close," the king said quietly, his hand tightening around hers. "Not all who linger in the shadows are patient, and now we have been noticed." Her heart pounded. She had entered this place seeking answers, yet she had never imagined the danger that awaited. And as the mist swirled around them, carrying whispers she could not understand, she realized that the curse of the Forgotten King was far more than blindness. It was a chain, binding not only him, but anyone who dared to care for him. The wind hissed through the broken windows, and the shadows deepened. Alara felt the pull of something ancient, waiting just beyond the light. She clutched the king's hand, drawing courage from his steady presence. "And now," he said, his voice low and commanding, "we must face what comes next, together." Alara nodded, though fear prickled at her. She did not yet know the full extent of the curse, nor the forces that sought to claim them. But she knew one thing: she would not let him face it alone. Not him, not the palace, not the shadows. The mist swirled higher, and a whisper carried through the halls. All who touch the forgotten king will be tested, and few will remain unbroken. Alara's grip on his hand tightened. Whatever awaited them, she would meet it. And perhaps in the darkness, they could find a light neither had known in decades. The palace seemed alive with whispers. Each step Alara took felt heavier than the last, as if the shadows themselves pressed against her, judging her every movement. The blind king walked beside her, cane tapping against the stone, steady and deliberate. Though he could not see, he moved with certainty, guiding her through corridors that twisted and wound like the veins of the forgotten kingdom. "They are close," he whispered, his voice calm but firm. "I feel them watching. Not all who linger in darkness mean well." Alara's stomach tightened. The palace had already tested her courage with its mirrors and memories. Now she understood that danger was not only in shadows of the past, it waited in the present. And it was patient. She glanced at the king. "Do you know who they are?" "They were once close to the throne," he said. "Claimants, opportunists, those who desired power more than life itself. They think me weak because I cannot see. But blindness does not mean helplessness, and neither does trust mean surrender." The words settled in Alara's mind like stones. She realized that the palace was more than a ruin, it was a battlefield, a stage for tests of loyalty, courage, and heart. And she had been cast as both witness and participant. The first sound came from the northern gallery, a scraping of armor against stone. Alara's heart leapt. Shadows moved in unnatural ways, as if they had a life of their own. She could not see the figures clearly, but she felt their intent, careful, calculated, hungry for the moment to strike. The king placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Do not fear," he said softly, "but do not underestimate them either. You must trust in what you have learned here, and in yourself." Alara nodded, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. She had felt the connection between them grow in the halls of memory and mirrors. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable, a thread pulling her closer, binding her in ways she could not explain. They moved quietly, stepping into the hall where the intruders had appeared. There, cloaked in shadow, were two figures, both tall and formidable, their presence a weight that pressed against the air. One carried a sword, the other a staff, both marked with symbols of power that glowed faintly in the dim light. The king stepped forward, his voice echoing. "You have come far, but I warn you, this kingdom is not yours to take." One of the figures laughed, a sound cold and hollow. "You call yourself a king," the voice sneered. "Blind, forgotten, powerless, and yet you linger here pretending the crown is yours. Step aside or be destroyed." Alara's pulse quickened. She could feel the danger radiating from them, the hunger for control, the arrogance that believed fear could conquer all. Yet beside her, the king was calm. His presence was a shield, subtle but unyielding, and she drew courage from it. "Blindness does not make me powerless," he said, his voice firm. "And the crown is not only mine. It belongs to those who have survived, who have endured, who have loved and protected this kingdom in ways you cannot understand." The intruders exchanged a glance, then moved forward. Shadows stretched along the walls, following their motion. Alara instinctively stepped closer to the king, placing her hand in his. He felt her resolve, her fear, her determination, and he met it with his own strength. The first strike came swiftly. The man with the sword lunged, but the king moved with surprising speed, guided by intuition and memory rather than sight. He sidestepped, and the sword clanged against the stone floor. Alara watched, heart pounding, as he turned to her, hand outstretched. "Stay close," he commanded. Together they moved through the hall, dodging and weaving between attacks, the shadows twisting in unnatural ways around them. Alara realized that the palace itself seemed to aid them, guiding them along paths the intruders could not see, hiding corners and passages that provided brief sanctuary. And yet, even as they fought, she felt something else, something deeper than fear or adrenaline. She felt the bond between them strengthen, a quiet intimacy born in the heart of danger. Every time their hands brushed, every time his voice guided her, she felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest. It was a feeling that went beyond admiration or respect. It was trust, and perhaps something more. Finally, they reached the Tower of Echoes, a place where the palace's memories were strongest. The intruders hesitated at the threshold, unsure if they should follow. And in that hesitation, the king found his moment. "Now," he said. He raised his cane, and a faint light shimmered around it, illuminating symbols etched into the floor. The palace seemed to respond, shadows twisting and retreating as if obeying some ancient command. The intruders faltered, uncertainty flashing across their faces. Ilara saw her chance. She stepped forward, recalling the lessons she had learned in the Hall of Echoes. Focusing on the power she could sense in the palace, she drew it to her, pushing the shadows back, holding the intruders at bay. It was not strength of muscle, but strength of heart and mind, courage combined with faith in the king and in herself. The intruders faltered, giving the king the opportunity to confront them directly. He spoke their names, names that had once meant power, fear, and betrayal, and with each word he reclaimed a fragment of authority stolen by the curse. The blindfolded king, forgotten for decades, was not merely surviving, he was rising. "You sought to claim this kingdom through fear," he said, voice echoing through the tower. "But fear alone cannot hold what is bound by love, loyalty, and truth. Leave or witness the power you cannot comprehend." The intruders hesitated, then slowly withdrew, melting back into the shadows. The palace seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had gripped its walls for decades. Ilara sank to her knees, breathless, her hands still trembling from the encounter. The king knelt beside her, placing a hand over hers. "You have done well," he said softly. "You have faced the darkness and held it at bay. That is no small feat." Ilara looked up at him, her chest heaving. "I could not have done it without you," she said. He smiled faintly. "Nor I without you. We are bound, you and I, by this place, by its memories, and by what we have discovered in each other." Her heart ached at his words. She realized then that their bond was more than mere survival. It was trust, respect, and something tender, something neither had expected in the ruins of a forgotten kingdom. But even in that moment of fragile triumph, the palace whispered warnings. Shadows flickered along the walls, faint and elusive. Ilara felt a chill creep over her. "There is more to come," the king said, sensing her unease. "The curse is not broken. The intruders were only a test, and the palace has secrets yet to reveal. Secrets that may demand sacrifices neither of us can yet imagine." Ilara nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She had survived one trial, but she knew in her heart that this was only the beginning. The curse that bound the king, and by extension the kingdom, was far from ended. And whatever lay ahead, she would have to face it, not alone, but together with him. As they ascended the stairs to the tower's highest point, the wind outside howled through the broken windows. Mist swirled like living tendrils, curling around the walls, carrying voices that whispered in tones both familiar and foreign. Ilara felt her pulse quicken. She had thought the danger was behind them, yet it seemed to have only grown stronger, more insistent. The king placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We will face it," he said, "together." She looked into the shadows, the swirling mist, and felt a sense of both dread and anticipation. Whatever was coming, it would test them beyond anything they had faced so far. And yet she did not step back. She had seen his courage, his wisdom, and his strength. And she had felt his trust, delicate and profound, offered freely to her. That trust was a bond she could not ignore, nor did she wish to. The palace seemed to pulse with life around them, as if acknowledging the new alliance. The forgotten king and the girl who had dared to see him not as a monster, but as a man. and in the shadows something stirred. A figure emerged from the mist, silent, deliberate. Its presence was not like the intruders before. This was older, darker, patient beyond imagining. Alara's stomach tightened as she realized, whatever this was, it knew them, and it had been waiting for the moment to strike. The king sensed it too. He pressed a hand to her back, guiding her silently. "They are coming," he whispered, "and not all of us may survive what is about to unfold." Alara swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the figure that moved closer. She did not flinch, though her heart pounded. Whatever came next, she would face it, because she had chosen to trust him, and in that trust she had found a strength she had never known before. The wind howled louder, carrying whispers of the past and promises of the trials to come. And as the first shadowed figure reached the edge of the light, the blind king's voice rang clear and commanding. "Prepare yourself, Alara. This is the moment when we are tested, not only by enemies, but by the darkness within ourselves." Her hand found his, and together they stood against the mist and shadow, ready to face the next chapter of their journey, whatever it might demand. The wind tore through the palace like a living thing, rattling the broken windows and stirring the mist that clung to the ruins. Alara clutched the blind king's hand as they stood at the edge of the great hall, where shadows gathered thick and restless. The figure that had emerged from the mist in the tower now stood before them, tall and cloaked in darkness, its presence radiating power and intent. "You have come far," it said, its voice low and echoing, "but no one escapes the weight of the forgotten." The king tightened his grip on his cane, and Alara felt the pulse of his courage through her own fingers. "We do not fear the forgotten," he said, voice steady. "And we will not bow to threats that rely on shadows." The figure stepped closer, and the mist seemed to coil around it like serpents. Its eyes glowed faintly beneath the hood, and Alara could feel the cold, measured power radiating from it. She realized with a jolt that this was not just a warrior or rival. It was the remnant of the sorceress's curse, bound to the palace and its king for decades, waiting for the moment to claim its final toll. "You dare touch him," it said, its voice cutting into the air. "You dare try to lift the curse. None survive this path." Alara's heart thudded. She could feel fear, yes, but also determination. She had walked through halls of memory, faced mirrors of the heart, and survived intruders who had tested every ounce of her courage. And through it all, she had not only survived, she had learned, she had grown, and she had chosen to stand by the king. He squeezed her hand. "We do this together," he said. "Trust in me as I trust in you." The figure laughed, a sound that chilled the bones. With a sweep of its hand, the shadows surged forward, swirling around the hall like living smoke. Alara felt their pressure, a pull at her very heart. She pressed herself closer to the king, drawing strength from his presence, from the trust they had built, from the bond that had grown in the ruins of this forgotten palace. "Focus on what is true," the king said. "The curse feeds on fear, doubt, and hesitation. It has no power over certainty, no power over those who believe in each other." Alara took a deep breath and felt the palace around her. She had learned its rhythms, its whispers, its hidden currents of energy. Slowly, she let herself connect to it, drawing light from the history etched into the walls, from the echoes of those who had lived and loved here long ago. The shadows surged again, but this time she felt a resistance rising from within her, from the bond she shared with the king. The figure recoiled slightly, hissing. The mist thinned where Alara's resolve shone, and she realized that the power of the curse was not endless. It was sustained by fear, by isolation, by despair. And they had brought something the curse could not touch: hope, trust, and courage. The king raised his cane, symbols glowing faintly along its length. "Now," he commanded, "we end this." Together they stepped forward. Alara could feel the figure's power pushing against them, trying to separate them, trying to crush their bond. But the king's hand in hers was steady, his voice guiding her, anchoring her. Step by step they advanced until they stood at the center of the great hall, facing the shadow that had haunted this place for decades. The figure lunged, but the palace itself seemed to respond. Stone cracked beneath its feet, light shimmered along the walls, and shadows retreated like waves from a shore. The king spoke the ancient words he had whispered only to Alara before, words of binding and release, of memory and courage, of love that transcends darkness. Alara repeated them, her voice firm and unwavering, feeling the syllables echo through the hall, through the palace, through every stone and shadow. The figure screamed, a sound of anger and frustration, and for the first time its form began to dissolve, unbinding itself from the curse it had held so long. A blinding light filled the hall. Ilara shielded her eyes, but the king's hand remained firm in hers. When she opened them again, the shadows were gone, the mist had cleared, and the palace felt alive, not as ruins, but as if it had been waiting for this moment, for the bond between them to break the chains that had held it for so long. The king removed his blindfold. Alara gasped. His eyes were bright, clear, and filled with a depth of life she had never imagined. And yet, even in his sight, there was no arrogance, no pride. Only gratitude, relief, and something deeper, something tender that reached out and touched her heart. You can see," she whispered, astonished, yet overwhelmed with emotion. "I can," he said, voice soft. "And I see more than I have in decades. I see you, Alara. I see your courage, your heart, and the light you have brought into this forgotten place." Alara felt a tear slide down her cheek, and she laughed softly through the emotion. "And I see you, finally, not as a legend, not as a shadow, but as the man you are." He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The curse is broken," he said. "But it has not left us unchanged. We carry the memory of it, the trials, the moments that tested us, and yet we have endured." She took a step closer to him, their hands still joined. "We have," she agreed, "and perhaps that is what makes this light brighter." The palace seemed to sigh, as if in agreement. Sunlight streamed through the broken windows, glinting on the stones, the carvings, the tapestries that had survived the years. It was a gentle light, soft and warm, carrying with it a promise that life, trust, and courage could endure even in the shadows. For the first time, Alara felt the weight of the palace lift. She realized that they had not only freed the king from the curse, but had also restored a part of the kingdom itself. Not to its former glory, perhaps, but to a place where life could grow again, where the past could be honored rather than feared. The king turned to her, his eyes bright with unspoken emotion. "You have changed everything," he said. "Not just the palace, not just me, but everything we touch from this day forward. You are part of this kingdom now as much as I am." Alara smiled, feeling a warmth bloom in her chest. "And you are part of my life," she said softly, "as much as I am part of yours." He reached for her face, gentle and deliberate, and she leaned into his touch. It was not a kiss of passion, but a connection far deeper, one of trust, of understanding, of a bond forged in shadows and tempered in trials. For a long moment, they simply stood together, hand in hand, feeling the light and the life around them. The palace no longer seemed like a ruin. It was a home, a sanctuary, a place where they could begin again. But even as they stood in the warmth, the wind whispered through the broken windows. Alara shivered, not from cold but from the memory of what they had faced, and the knowledge that the world outside the palace still held dangers and uncertainties. The king noticed and squeezed her hand. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together. That is the promise we made and the one we will keep." Alara nodded, her heart steady. "Together," she agreed. The sun rose higher, casting golden light over the palace. Shadows of the past still lingered, faint and distant, but they no longer held power over them. The curse had ended, the bond between them had been tested and strengthened, and a new chapter of their lives was beginning. Alara looked around the palace, seeing it for the first time not as a place of fear, but as a place of possibility. And as she turned back to the king, she saw not just a ruler restored, but a man who had endured darkness and emerged whole, and a partner who would walk beside her into whatever future awaited. Together they stepped forward, leaving behind the shadows, the whispers, and the weight of centuries. They moved into the sunlight, into the life that awaited, bound by trust, courage, and the quiet, enduring power of love. The palace had waited long for this moment, and now, finally, it breathed again. And as they walked through the halls hand in hand, Alara realized that some legends are not about power or fear or curses, but about courage, hope, and the hearts that refuse to surrender, even in the darkest places. The kingdom was not only restored, it was reborn. And in the golden light of the morning, with the blind king restored and the curse lifted, Alara knew that their story, though born in shadow, had found its dawn.